Hello again, lovely people, and welcome to the third instalment of Book Chat. This is a semi-regular series in which I chat about books that I have read recently that I have thoughts on.
Sophie Vlogs.
This week's video is going to be me talking about all the things that I read in December. I read quite a lot in December, so this is going to be actually a two-part video. So if you keep your eyes peeled and maybe subscribe, then you would find out all the rest of the stuff I read in December. It was a very productive reading month. So starting off, I went on holiday in December to Edinburgh, which was super lovely. I've been there a couple of times. It's one of my favourite places. I really, really like it. So I took my Kindle with me because, you know, flying, easier to just have one thing than like a gazillion books. So most of the things I read are on here, and I will run through them for you. So the first book I'm going to talk about is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I've read one of her books before, which was The Dispossessed, which was a sort of science fiction, takes place on another planet type thing. Quite political, quite, I would say, like an adult science fiction book. Whereas The Wizard of Earthsea is, I think, one of her first books, certainly the ones that sort of launched her into the mainstream type thing. This is aimed at younger readers, I'd say, sort of, I wouldn't necessarily label it as YA, but sort of like the young adult type audience, I think. Or even kids could probably read it, I don't know. Depends how mature your child is. This follows a mage called Ged, G-E-D, I hope I'm saying that right, who, he sort of, on his journey as he's becoming a mage, training to be a mage, and then he sort of accidentally unleashes something and has to then sort of deal with those consequences and spend his life working to try and like unleash it, if you will. I enjoyed this book. I thought it was a really good sort of classic fantasy-esque book. It's one of those very well-known stories where you sort of follow your protagonist as he like becomes himself, but I think she handled it really well. I think there's a lot of originality that is mixed in with this very like well-known plot arc. It's the first book of a trilogy, and I definitely want to check out the other two having read it. And I think it's solidifying the fact that I quite like Ursula K. Le Guin, and she's such a big name, and to have only read two of her books, I know I need to really like do more, because I feel like she is someone whose work I would really enjoy. I think she does all the things that I like. So if you are a fan of fantasy books and haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. And also, if you want to introduce sort of fantasy books to younger readers, I'd say this is a really great start point. Following on from that, I decided to read a topical book. Bearing in mind I was in Edinburgh at the time, there are so many books that were either written in Edinburgh or inspired by Edinburgh, that sort of thing. I had such a good choice. So I chose to read Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, because it's one of those books that I think we all sort of have an awareness of. It's sort of like permeated into our culture, like we all are familiar with the concept. But when we were going around, we did lots of museums and stuff like that, and so there was various things about Robert Louis Stevenson, and I thought maybe this could be my moment to actually read it. And weirdly, I was surprised by how much I liked it. I think sometimes when something is like a classic, although I've read a bunch of things like classics, I think sometimes I get put off because there's such associations with them, and there's like, it's like if something is a classic, it's like worthy. I don't know. There's this whole like, I don't know, I have this whole thing in my brain where I think I get a bit intimidated by classics because I'm like afraid that they're not going to be as wonderful as like I think they will. But this was fantastic. I really liked it. I found it very easy to read, very accessible, and although I already knew like the twist, it did not hamper my enjoyment at all. It was really nice to just like actually read it and experience it, and yeah. So would definitely recommend. Next up, I read a book called Let It Snow, which is actually 3 different stories by 3 different authors. Because it was before Christmas, I was trying to get myself into the Christmas spirit by reading like a Christmassy themed romance collection. I didn't love this, I have to confess. The first story, which is by Maureen Johnson, was my favourite. It was very like quirky YA girl type thing, but I liked that. I found Jubilee, the main character, interesting. I liked her story. All 3 stories focus on different people, but they are sort of set within the same like setting, so they sort of interweave as you work your way through. I have to confess, I didn't really care for the John Green or Laura Miracle ones. They were fine. I didn't love them. I found them a bit boring, which is a shame because I have read John Green in the past and I've liked it and all that. I didn't like them, I'm afraid. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I'm sorry. Next up we have a book that I picked up when I was in Edinburgh. There are some delightful bookshops there. I got this one from Edinburgh Books. This is The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll. It has little illustrations all throughout which are quite sweet. And this copy has a little dedication in the front. It's quite an old edition, but I thought it was really sweet. Alice in Wonderland was my favourite book when I was a child, and this is referenced in it. So I thought it was just a nice little reminder of my holiday and something which I wanted to read, really. Following on from that, we have Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. In the comic/graphic novel world, I know this has a lot of hype around it, and I've known for ages that I was going to like it. So I finally went for it and picked it up, and it was as good as everyone has said it is. I don't have it with me because I sent it off in the post to my friend because I just wanted to share it with someone. I thought it was lovely. It was fun, but it also had like a little serious little plotline, which was like, oh. Her art style is lovely. It was just really enjoyable. I've followed Noelle on Twitter and like her social media for a while, so I'm like familiar with her work, but I'm really glad to have actually like sat down and read this proper book now because I can feel like I have a much better appreciation. And it does make me want to pick up and read Lumberjanes, I have to say. The penultimate book I'm going to talk about is one that I have previously mentioned in a haul video on this channel, and that is The Life and Death of Jason by William Morris. Previously, the only William Morris I've actually read is The Roots of the Mountains, which is very different. First of all, it's a novel and it's prose. It's sort of like a fantasy-esque book, like it reminded me a little bit of sort of the whole setup of like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, but it doesn't quite go far enough to really be a proper fantasy book in my opinion. So I'm a bit fuzzy on how to categorise it. It was fine. I found it a little bit hard going. He wrote in a very antiquated style, which was deliberate, but it just meant that I didn't find it the most enjoyable to read. In contrast, this was a really enjoyable read, because this is sort of like verse poetry, so rhyming couplets all throughout, split into books like Little Epic would be. I found his style of writing much more enjoyable in this, and I was familiar with the tale of Jason and the Argonauts and Medea and all that sort of thing, so none of like the plot stuff was a real surprise to me, but I really enjoyed the experience of reading it, and I frequently read it aloud because it sounds really lovely when you read it aloud, especially with the rhyming couplets. So yeah, this was actually I enjoyed this. I gave it a solid 3 out of 5 stars because I didn't think it was like the most amazing thing I've ever read, but it was quite lovely and has sort of renewed my enthusiasm for reading more of William Morris's like poetry and prose and stuff. I'm very into him as in like visual mediums and stuff like this, and I think I have a lot more of his work to explore, and this is sort of like reminded me that I want to do that. The final book I'm going to talk about for this instalment of Book Chat is Nerd Do Well by Simon Pegg. This is Simon Pegg's autobiography. I like Simon Pegg's films. I think he seems like a pretty nice person. I like his sense of humour. This was interesting. I've read more autobiographies this year than I thought I was going to. This one sort of, he kind of withholds. This is not like a tell-all expose. It's more of like an insight into his brain. So he does go through like his life and tells you like key things that happened and, you know, like where his love of theatre and performing came from, stuff like this. So you do get stuff about his life, but in a way that sort of makes me like him more. He doesn't want to tell you everything because like it's his life and it's private, and I can kind of really understand that. So instead there's sort of 2 ways that he does this. Like there's the overall framing narrative, which is chapters of him talking about his life interspersed with these chapters that are like this like story he's telling where he's like this superhero and he has like this robot butler and they're going on these escapades and stuff like this. So initially that, whilst being entertaining, is also like sort of pointing out the artificiality of him constructing a narrative about his own life. Following on from that as well, whilst he does tell you about his life, he also, because he is someone who makes films and acts, etc., obviously that is an important part of his life, so he does a lot of film analysis or talking about the iconic pieces of media that really influenced his life, which, whilst he's not being like, here are my deepest, darkest secrets, he is giving you a really interesting look into his brain and how he relates to films and what films define him and his film style and that sort of thing. So I really liked that, actually. My favourite bit of this is he spends quite a lot of time, maybe like 2 chapters or something, talking about Star Wars, and Star Wars as its importance to him, and also Star Wars as its importance to the, like, political time it was written in and stuff like this. That was all really interesting because I read this just before I went to see Rogue One in the cinema, and when I went to see Rogue One I had all of his Star Wars thoughts in my brain, and that was my favourite part of it, actually. As like a film analyzer, he has some interesting things to say. That's it for this instalment of Book Chat. I will post sort of like a Book Chat 3.5 in like a week or so, which will be the rest of the stuff that I read. I just didn't want to like overload everyone with like one really long video, so I thought I'd like split it into 2. But December was weirdly productive. I think it must have something to do with Christmas, you know, like you're having more like chilled out times and you do a lot more reading and stuff like that. But yes, so do let me know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts on these, or if you have read anything recently that you liked. I always want to talk about books. Have a lovely day, and I will see you next week.